Hokie Hangover, live on YouTube at 7 minutes past 10 o'clock. The reason why we are 7 minutes past 10 o'clock and not right at 10 o'clock is because in my effort to start this podcast on time, I sent the links early. Actually, pause. Did not send the links early. Tried to send the links early. I said, hey, where are you guys at? You guys responded with, hey, I didn't get a link yet. That's because I never hit send. So here we are, almost 10 minutes late.
It is, I felt gaslit there for a second, Mike. We were like, send the links. They're in your DMs. Me and Ricky are both, I'm like, is Twitter broken? Can I not do this? But it's all good.
Put it past them.
I think what we're learning here is that just Mike and Brent Pry are a lot alike. They are very good at taking accountability publicly for their failures.
Yes, I thought you were going to say we were technologically deficient, and you can point to another ACC coach.
I cannot speak to Brent Pry's technological skill set.
Well, I was going to point to another ACC coach, Dabo Swinney, who said that he just learned how to download YouTube TV to his cell phone. So
that's groundbreaking stuff from Dabo.
Groundbreaking stuff. That's a good segue, guys, because basically 15 minutes before this podcast started, there was some huge news dropped by Ross Dellinger of Yahoo. Speaking of Clemson, this is from Dellinger. ACC presidents have reviewed an altered revenue structure that would resolve the disputes of Florida State and Clemson and keep them in the league. Sources tell Yahoo Sports nothing is imminent. That's key. Nothing is imminent, and it's unclear if there is enough support to approve the proposal. I have been trying to read this and understand as much of this as I can. The SparkNotes version from what I read, like basically just before we recorded this podcast. Again, this is just breaking, so I'll be a lot smarter on this tomorrow than I will be right now. Maybe I'm talking a little bit out of turn, but from what I understand, there's a proposal on the table that would alter the revenue structure, essentially pay Florida State and Clemson a little bit bigger share based on television revenue, other stuff. There's like a real ambiguous like performance incentive thing. We've heard these items brought up before, right? Florida State actually proposed it a little over a year ago. Remember that whole Drew Rutherford rant where he was like, "Yeah, I want more money for Florida State, and we bring X amount of value to the league," and it was real vague, real ambiguous. I think the ACC just kind of through the course of litigation, everything that's happened, probably understands that Florida State and Clemson, even though the grant of rights kind of binds them to the league, they're doing really everything in their power to get out, and they're trying to figure out a way to maybe try to keep them in the league. And this would be one way to do it, shift more money to them. I could see why other ACC schools would be really mad about this, right? They were mad about it at the time. I can see why they'd still be upset that Clemson and Florida State would be getting a lion's share of the money. I understand that argument. But I think in an effort to have the ACC not go the route of like the Mountain West, this would be a step in the right direction. Another quick piece here before I kind of open up the floor to you guys on your thoughts on it. There is some indication here from Dellinger that the grant of rights window, that basically the grant of rights with the ACC runs through like the mid-2030s, and that's been a point of contention for Florida State and Clemson, obviously, who have been trying to get out of the league's grant of rights. That could be shortened, potentially, as part of this agreement to, like, I don't know, 2030-ish. So that's interesting. So I could see this as maybe a short-term stopgap. Could also see this as, maybe something that could point to a bigger and better ACC in the future. And the reason why I want to mention that too is because the final paragraph in here from Dellinger said that the TV deal between ACC and ESPN actually ends in 2027, even though the grant of rights goes through 2036. ESPN must elect by next February, so this coming February, to opt in for another 9 years, right? So that would take it through basically the end of the current grant of rights, give or take like 18 months. And the ACC and ESPN have been active negotiations over an extension, conversations that Phillips has described as positive and productive. So that's encouraging as well. Really, well, this is a big we'll see, but we don't even know if this is going to garner support amongst ACC presidents, right? That's a big piece of this. How much, is this going to be supported or not is a big question we have here, obviously. But it's out there, right? Florida State and Clemson, they've been suing the ACC for the better part of a year, and there's a chance for some sort of resolution here. So that's the news.
So what we're learning here, boys, is that in order to get a more favorable situation for yourself or your organization or your team, whatever, no matter what the situation is, the best thing to do is to publicly trash the other party that you're negotiating with and then sue them into oblivion. That's what this looks like. So in case you couldn't tell, my initial reaction to this is that I hate it. I think it's terrible. I completely understand why the ACC long-term benefits from having Florida State and Clemson in the league. However, giving them more money and then shortening the length of time in which they are stuck in the conference is a lose-lose proposition as far as I'm concerned. I don't like that they're getting special treatment. I understand that they have very large fan bases and bring a lot of exposure to the conference. But it's one season and it's not even a full season. In case you haven't missed it, Florida State's 0-3 and is the laughing stock of college football at the moment. So let's just not forget that little fact.
Yeah, slide that in there.
Yeah, I just had to. But no, in all seriousness, to me, not a big fan of it. It does not accomplish the long-term goal of Jim Phillips, which is to retain the conference's integrity through the grant of rights of 2036. Hell, he hasn't even negotiated the ESPN extension like you mentioned, Mike. So to me, this doesn't seem like this is going to get the deal done in any situation. My initial thought is I would rather force Clemson and Florida State to pay the combined, $800 to $1 billion it would cost them to get out of the league. I would rather force them to pay that money and then use that money to go shopping elsewhere.
It's all good, and that sounds like a great plan, Rick, until somebody in court says, you know what, the grant of rights actually isn't as enforceable as you think it is.
Mike, you're preaching to the choir. Who said on this podcast 2 years ago that the grant of rights is only as strong as the lawyers defending it in court? I understand that.
Yeah, yep.
But if you're able to defend it in court, then do it.
Yeah.
Hold them to account.
Clemson
and Florida State should not be able to take the rest of the conference hostage,
Rick,
because they're not happy with. They already got the performance incentive increases, right? That's already been accounted for into future revenue distribution. So now we're going to take that and adjust it even further based on completely arbitrary standards in order to get Florida State and Clemson even more money. Tell me how that works.
Wouldn't this concession be an indicator that they don't love their chances of defending this thing in court? Wouldn't this be the last-ditch effort of
potentially, but
trying to preserve itself?
Potentially, but if that's the case, Andrew, all it does is delay the inevitable.
But it buys you time.
If anyone thinks that Florida State and Clemson are staying in this conference longer than they have to, you're out of your mind. So you either let them go early or you let them go when they're supposed to go and take it all the way to court and let the judges and the lawyers figure it out.
Okay, but Ricky, if the judges and the lawyers in court figure it out 8 months from now, that yes, Florida State and Clemson can walk for whatever reason.
Well, then you're screwed anyway, because the grant of rights isn't enforceable against anybody.
There are, I would say, and I don't know if Virginia Tech falls in this category, but there are more schools in the ACC that are invested in seeing the ACC preserved than the schools that feel like they could be just fine without it.
Okay, but what incentive? If we're already just going to say that schools can negotiate against the conference, right? And we're going to say they can hold the conference hostage, sue the hell out of them, and then say the grant of rights aren't enforceable. what incentive does any of the other programs in this conference have to stay in the ACC if the revenue distribution is going to be cut already less than what it is, which is not very much, and you have conferences throughout the country that are looking to expand?
I
Would
think
their
with
revenue,
the ACC,
would Wake Forest's revenue distribution giving a little more to Florida State and Clemson be more or less than if the ACC entirely collapses and they're playing in some like American-esque
Conference USA
priced out league? Yeah, I mean
right.
Again,
I'll be honest, Andrew, I don't know because I don't know what the specifics of this new revenue distribution are. None of us do.
Yeah, none of us do.
But my gut is telling me that letting Florida State and Clemson extort the rest of the conference is not a good idea.
More
and
to
it's
it,
not
though.
good for the future of the conference.
Yes,
that's my thought.
And my point, which by the way, I'm not saying I agree with this or whatever, just from a, institutions are going to act in what they feel like is their own best interest most of the time, unless we just assume that the people running the conference are complete morons making a terrible move, which quite frankly, given the recent history of this conference, you actually can think that. But we're assuming that they're doing something that they feel, for whatever reason, is in the best interest, at least of the people pushing it, right? Which I would say may not be the best interest of every member institution, but they have to be looking at the alternative and seeing, for them, the ACC, what remains of it, and the member institutions that make it up, that buying some time and paying Florida State and Clemson is better than the alternative, which is, and frankly, again, we don't know enough details to know, what the exact construct is here. If we're shortening the grant of rights by how much time, if we're renegotiating, how truly binding is that? You have to assume that it's going to be extremely binding if that's what we're arguing in court right now. But I don't know. Maybe the conference sees this entire situation as bad for its health, and a more civil separation in the long run might be a better thing for everyone.
Well, the last paragraph of this report from Dellinger, I think, is key, right? So talking about how the ACC and ESPN are in active negotiations over a television extension on the contract. And that part's key because if you're the ACC, you'd rather be bargaining knowing that Florida State and Clemson are with you, right? You negotiate a settlement, and then you go back to ESPN, and you're like, hey, look, like, they're staying. So we want more money. You're bargaining from a position of weakness from the ACC standpoint. I agree with Ricky. You're bargaining from a position of weakness in that you're ceding ground, right, from a revenue standpoint to Florida State and Clemson if you're like the rest of the ACC. But if you're Jim Phillips and you're able to find a way, at least in the short term, to keep Florida State and Clemson around long enough to renegotiate your television contract, then even if Florida State and Clemson leave the league in a few years, you're still going to put yourself in a better position, 4 or 5 years down the road than you're in right now, right? You're in a better, and this is kind of what Ricky was alluding to a little bit. It can be kind of accomplished the same way. Ricky's talking about the exit fees that Florida State and Clemson would have to pay if the grant of rights if it's ruled that the grant of rights, is enforceable and these schools can't leave. They have to pay a gigantic exit fee. The other way to accomplish that is to keep them in the conference short term, negotiate a bigger television contract with ESPN, and make it more enticing for them to go. Because for the ACC, like, they'd rather have Clemson and Florida State in the league than walk and take their money. Clearly, they wouldn't be negotiating a settlement otherwise.
So my question to you, Mike, is do you think that ESPN would sign an extension with the ACC that did not include a clause saying that the entire deal is essentially up for renegotiation if Clemson and Florida State leave?
I mean,
because at that point,
they already signed a deal.
Much less.
Well, I mean, they already signed it. I mean, the existing television contract didn't say anything about schools leaving. I mean, realignments existed before the last few years.
Yeah, but that was before they sued the conference.
That was before they sued the conference. That's fair.
I want to point something out from the comments here. Common sense comments at this point. Where are they leaving to go? The other power conferences is overloaded. I mean, that is an excellent point, though, because when we're talking about maybe the ACC reestablishing themselves into a spot of power where Clemson or Florida State staying isn't necessarily a horrible deal for them. Part of that you have to consider is where are they going? Because you hear things, and maybe this is ACC like media plants putting this out there, but that with the Big Ten and SEC, there's not this overwhelming, compelling interest to reel in a Florida State or a Clemson. That those conferences might not necessarily see that outsized value. So who are you competing with? The Big 12? I'm sure the Big 12 would take them. So can you negotiate into yourself in a position of power against the Big 12? Maybe.
Well, this is key from Dellinger's report too. In regard to Clemson and Florida State, if they were to leave the ACC, it is unlikely that the SEC or Big Ten will agree to accept a reduction in their TV distribution to add any school. Because you got to remember, these schools have already, the schools in the SEC and the Big Ten have already signed these gigantic television contracts. Their revenue distribution is set. They'd have to divide it again and take less money if you add another school to the conference, right? That's why all the presidents have to vote on it and agree that the value proposition is enough to add these schools into the league, right? That's what happens. So as of right now, it says it's unlikely that any SEC or Big Ten school will agree to accept a reduction in their TV distribution to add either Clemson or Florida State. For the SEC, that is especially so, given its footprint. The league already owns a foothold in South Carolina and Florida. And this kind of adds to something I've always thought, which, why would the SEC add Clemson or Florida State when, and if you're ESPN, what's the motivation, right? Because we know that the television broadcast partners have a big part in this. What's ESPN's motivation to add Clemson or Florida State to the SEC? And what, pay them more? They already own their television contract. They already own it. They own the broadcast rights to Clemson and Florida State at a much smaller price point, right? And I'm sure that's a sticking point in negotiations with Jim Phillips, right? As he's trying to advance the ACC. It's like, well, you guys have the SEC, all this money. Like, what is the ACC worth to you? And I think if you're Phillips, the ACC is worth a lot more if Clemson and Florida State are in the league than without it. From ESPN's standpoint, they're thinking, well, we already own Clemson and Florida State's broadcast rights. And if they walk, right, and leave, they're not coming to the SEC, right? ESPN probably has a pretty good idea they're not going to the SEC. And it doesn't seem like they're going to go to the Big Ten either. Now, does this all change if they're actually able to exit to the league? Who knows, right? If they're actually able to leave the ACC, maybe things change a little bit. But right now, it doesn't seem like a path for Clemson and Florida State out of the ACC means they're automatically going to the SEC or the Big Ten. Far from it.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, long story short, right? It's super easy for you to be Clemson or Florida State and think to yourself, yeah, of course, we want to be in a position where, our football program is bringing in more cold, hard cash. But does that align with the incentive structure of the people that you'd be looking to take the cash from? And the answer is no. So
you're in one of the 4 power leagues right now, right? Like, you're in it. So, okay, I mean, the Big 12 is definitely interested in expanding, right? Like, Yormark has made no qualms about that. Like, he wants to continue to expand the league. I mean, we're just a couple weeks removed from the report that he was trying to add UConn to the league again, right? Because he wants their basketball. He wants their basketball program in the conference, which I understand. It's a powerhouse, right? But it's clear that Yormark and the Big 12, they aren't done adding. So, okay, Clemson, are you in a much better position in the Big 12 than you're in with the ACC? You're in a moderately better position because the TV contract right now for the Big 12 is better than the one the ACC has. But is that going to be the case here in a few months if the ACC and ESPN are able to strike a deal for a kind of a more sweetened TV contract? Maybe not. Maybe the motivation to leave and go to a conference like the Big 12 would be much less. I don't know. So,
well, yeah. I mean, I think the ultimate conclusion for me is, even if this does help things in the short term, I do not think this is a long-term solution for the ACC.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm not inclined to think so either. But I mean, if there's a new TV deal I think all bets are off. I think it's probably too early to tell, but it seems to me, at least on the surface, given what we know right now with like the facts, because everything else is speculation, like the facts are Clemson and Florida State want to leave the league. The grant of rights, as we know it right now, is binding. They'd have to pay exorbitant exit fees to leave, right? And the television contract between ESPN and the ACC currently is the least competitive out of any of the 4 power leagues. Like, those are the facts right now.
Yep.
What's speculative is if Clemson and Florida State leave, where would they go? And that's probably that's probably the smallest item on the list. The others are, what does the new television contract with ESPN and the ACC look like? What does the grant of rights litigation continue to look like, right? Like, maybe there's a deal where Clemson and Florida State, they agree to stay in the ACC, but then if, the Supreme Court or the district courts or whoever's ruling on this, right, the state court level says, okay, the grant of rights actually isn't binding, that's going to have wide sweeping effects across all of college sports. That's not just the ACC. That's going to be anybody with television contract and grant of rights, right? So that's going to be across the board. That's going to really impact media distribution for a lot of schools, even schools who just signed on with these super leagues, right? The Big Ten and the SEC. So that's going to have wide sweeping effects. So we'll see. I mean, that news broke tonight, so I figured we should touch on at the top of the show.
Speaking of non-football news, let's talk about the next one.
Tennessee. So Tennessee is they are rolling out for 2025. Danny White, their athletic director, they are rolling out a talent fee for season ticket holders. Now the season tickets are going up like 14.5%, something along those lines. 10% of it is going to be a talent fee to help Tennessee pay for its football roster. And again, speaking of things that are unknown, because there's the House versus the NCAA case that's still going on, that's going to end up putting college athletics in a revenue sharing model, which we don't know really anything about what that's going to look like yet. But Tennessee is gearing up for that right now and finding ways to continue to pay for a competitive roster. And why wouldn't they? They're a top 10 team. They got a good thing going with Heupel. They are playing in one of the most competitive leagues in college sports, right, in the SEC. I understand it from Tennessee's view. The part that's more interesting to me is the part that really sucks about this entire thing is that the buck continues to get passed to the fans, right? Pay more for tickets, support this NIL collective, support that NIL collective. Oh, support this scholarship fund, support that scholarship fund. Oh, now help us pay for the roster. Now it's a talent fee thing. At what point for a college football fan, right? At what point does it just stop, right? Where it's going so far beyond the cost of just going to the game. If you're just like a middle-class college football fan, like trying to take your wife and kids to a football game, at what point does it stop being about paying the players, and be about the fan experience? I think we're getting so far beyond what college football is about at this point. It's like, and I am pro NIL, I am pro players getting paid, I am pro all of that, but with some sort of guardrails and regulations, which we still don't have. I mean, this is getting out of control for the paying college football fan, in my opinion.
Well, this was always the problem, Mike, that as a collective, sports media in general, not saying everyone in sports media, but the industry in general demanded that we needed to pay these players. We had to. It's not fair. They're being abused. We're screwing these guys. We have to pay them. And in their haste to pay these guys, no critical thinking went into any of this. No critical thinking went into how you're going to fund these payrolls. No critical thinking went into how you're going to police these contracts to make sure they're legitimate. No critical thinking went into whether or not name, image, and likeness would actually be name, image, and likeness or just a paycheck. nobody had any critical thinking into whether or not this was going to hurt Olympic sports and schools were going to have to start cutting scholarships from those programs. Nobody thought about any of this. ESPN didn't, Fox didn't, CBS, the university presidents, the university athletic directors, the sports media landscape in general, nobody. So we've now reached a point where we have let our desires, again, as a collective, drive us into a position where, once again, and this is true in just basic economics, the consumer is always going to pick up the tab, right? This is true across the board. If costs go up, Mike, those costs don't get transferred to the business. The business is going to say, okay, well, now we have to charge more. So instead of looking at some of these exorbitant college salaries and how much money are being spent on these just absolutely ludicrously large coaching staffs where you have, platoons of analysts in the booth and on the field, rather than examining coaching salaries or rather than examining all sorts of other funding models and where this money is going, we're just going to continue to charge the fan who has dealt with like 8% inflation over the last 3 years minimum on average. Yep. So it's not sustainable. And I think I said this on a pod probably last summer, or maybe it was this summer, but at some point the bubble is going to pop. I don't know when it's going to be, but you've already seen it in a lot of ways in the NFL, where how often do NFL stadiums sell out now? It's not all that often. I mean, I think, part of me is that I used to be a Redskins fan and they never sold out FedEx Field.
I was about to say, this might be your biased individual.
But even if you watch,
you mean Northwest Stadium?
Yeah. Even if you watch a normal game in November in the NFL, there's like a 40% chance it's sold out. There are swaths of empty seats throughout that stadium. So the NFL is now saying, okay, well, now we have to try and make money elsewhere, which is why we have 2 games on Monday night. We have games on Thursday. They're going to end up with games on Friday late in the season and on Saturday and on Sunday. So in our haste to try and find a way to give the players more money, we have created a system where all of the demands from this are being rested on the fans. And it's not fair. It's not right. It's not sustainable. I don't know if there's ever going to be an alternative that programs and conferences look at, because it's so much easier just to raise your prices. But I really hate it. And one of the things we talked about earlier this year, Mike, was the fact that Virginia Tech does not have a policy where children can get in with their parents, like infants and toddlers.
Yeah.
And Mike, you said it yourself. This is one of the reasons why you haven't gone to a Virginia Tech game in the last 3 years, 2 years.
Yeah, not in Blacksburg. I mean, my only game I've been to since, I guess, Fuentes last year was the Military Bowl last year.
Yeah, which is a few hours from your house.
Right, which is, yeah.
And it was a day trip.
Hour and a half. Yeah, it was a day trip. Whereas Blacksburg's like 4 hours from my house. It's tougher to do a day trip.
Yeah, that might have something to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah. Large.
I
was also
the
at
way
child
Mike
care.
was active when he was going to football games in Blacksburg every other weekend. It was not conducive to Father Mike nowadays.
It's harder. It's harder to get child care covered and then just go bar hopping. Like I used to do basically every weekend I was in Blacksburg.
But there are enough costs associated with going to a game, whether it be travel, lodging, food, all of that stuff. But then having to pay, like if you're a season ticket holder, you're having to pay an extra donation to the department to get your season ticket. You're having to pay extra money for your parking on top of what a standard parking permit would be. So, and now Tennessee is going to say, okay, well, that season ticket cost you were paying, that just went up 15%. 10 of which is to fund this roster.
It's become a bit of a because college administrators are so scared of this. It's become a little bit of like a GoFundMe crowdfunding type deal.
Well, God forbid they take any of the money from those TV contracts. I mean, come on.
Look. There's only so much money that comes from those when they are paying coaches. Like in Tennessee's case, they're paying Heupel $8 million a year with that new contract he signed about a year and a half ago. It's crazy. I mean, the money in college athletics right now is nuts, and these schools have to not only pony up, right, to pay the players, but they also have to get money together, for example, for buyouts when things aren't going well. And they have to continue to pay old coaches and old staffs when things aren't going as well as they'd like. So this sounds great for Tennessee because Heupel's been there a while, and they're in a pretty good position from that standpoint. They're recruiting really well. You know, they got one of the top quarterbacks in college football in Nico Iamaleava. I don't think I butchered that too bad. And, you know, he was a 5-star quarterback, and they recruited him, and he came into the program, and he looks like he's a stud, and things are rolling, and he's going to be there at least another year. And things are looking really good for Tennessee's football program, to the point where, like, you have that fan support, right? Tennessee's got a great fan base, and you can justify sliding in a talent fee when it looks like your team is going to be potentially competing for a national championship. Like, they're legit. The defense is sick, and the offense scores 45, 50 points a game. That team is disgusting. They're a sleeper in the SEC. Not so much anymore, but they're going to contend for an SEC title this year. And it's easy to go to your fans and be like, hey, would you mind paying a little bit more? Because we got things rolling right now. The future's uncertain, and we would like to continue to keep this thing rolling. I don't know, man. It's a tough sell if you're in like Virginia Tech's shoes, where money is harder to come by anyway, right? From an NIL standpoint, a little bit harder to come by at Virginia Tech than it is at Tennessee. And then on top of it, you just don't have you haven't had the football success that Tennessee's had in recent years. You just haven't had it. So I feel like it's just a lot harder for like the run-of-the-mill college football program, like let's talk about like a top 40, top 50 program in the sport that's not at that upper echelon 10, 15, 20 schools, to be like, hey, can you pay this talent fee? Hey, can you pay this? Can you pay that? And it's the price of doing business, right? And I understand that, and I get why Tennessee's doing it, but at what point does it stop? And maybe it's just the answer is, well, it's going to stop with revenue sharing here in a year or two, and things are going to look different. But like, we've talked about this before too, and maybe this is something we can expand upon now. Like, is this going to be at the expense of other college sports? Like, when revenue sharing comes around, I think the answer is yes. We're already starting to see it.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
I mean,
I don't know.
My thought with when it's going to stop, though, I mean, it just like in anything else. Like there is the price is driven by the demand. Like, no one is asking, the fans of the Denison football program to pay their players' salaries because it's Division III football and there's no demand for it. If the fans are willing to go out there and the fans are willing to pony up, then you can justify that. And for the schools that aren't, well, your players aren't going to get paid as much. And that, my friends, is how the caste system of college football exacerbates over time. But in what way is that really that different? I mean, it's certainly more direct. That's what we've been doing in college football for years. It seems like obviously that the tone and the pace of the conversation has changed in the era of NIL. But when we started this podcast, it was all about, well, if you guys just donated to the program, the team would be better, right? And now it's the schools that can pay the players the most are going to have the best rosters and, on paper, the best chances year over year to be a contender at the national level. It's all supply and demand driven, and maybe that'll even out a little bit with revenue sharing. But it's always been the way, and now it's just done in a more direct form and fashion when you have Tennessee literally as the institution asking the fans to pay their players.
Yeah.
It's different, but in a lot of ways, it's more of the same.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's just going to be interesting to see how widespread this is. I mean, look, Oklahoma State, they tried to do the whole QR codes on the back of the helmets. Hey, you can pay our kids that way, and the NCAA shot it down. We're going to see different, new, and creative ways for schools to try to make money.
I would have rather had that than a 10% surcharge.
Oh, yeah, because you can kind of pay at your own pace, and it's not – it's optional, right? It's optional versus, this is what you have to pay if you want to purchase your season ticket or renew your season ticket next year. It's tough. Rutgers preview. We've talked 35 minutes on Florida State, Clemson, and Tennessee, and everybody except Virginia Tech. We're going to continue to kind of do that. Virginia Tech's playing Rutgers this weekend, 3:30, inside Lane Stadium. This is the biggest game of the year so far. I don't know how else to couch it. It's the biggest game of the year so far. This is also a very similar team to the one that Virginia Tech saw a year ago, in that Rutgers returns a lot of starters both offensively and defensively. One key difference with Rutgers' roster this year versus last year is Ethan Kaliakmanis is their quarterback. He's a sophomore transfer from Minnesota. Little bit up and down in his first year in Minnesota. He's been better so far this year, but that's because Rutgers has played two powerhouses of Howard from the FCS and Akron, a lower-level MAC team. So his numbers look pretty good. More importantly, they still have Kyle Monaghan, the running back, who's really good. Runs all over everybody, including Ohio State last year. He went for like $130 or something like that. So he's really good. Virginia Tech knows all about him after how that game went last year. Good offense, good defense, well coached, but a different looking offense than a year ago, in that Kaliakmanis is more of a pocket passer than a dual threat quarterback in the mold of Gavin Wimsatt, who the Hokies faced a year ago. So that's the 10,000-foot view on Rutgers before diving into kind of individually what they bring to the table. But do you guys have anything to add, just kind of broadly 30,000-foot view?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm not so sure that this passing attack for Rutgers is going to be much better than it was last year. I mean, they haven't played anybody, so it's really hard to gauge what kind of abilities they have to move the ball through the air at this point, but they're relying on a bunch of like FCS lower level transfers at receiver. Kaliakmanis does not have a good track record at Minnesota, and coming into Rutgers, you're not really sure what he's going to do with this kind of supporting cast against what are going to be essentially the same kind of defenses that he faced at Minnesota. Virginia Tech's got some pretty good DBs. I think we can agree with that, especially at corner. So I'm not entirely worried about Rutgers' ability to move the ball through the air in this game. But Mike, you mentioned it. Kyle Monaghan is a baller. He's
good.
Really good. If I remember correctly, he led the conference in rushing last year. He's extremely physical. He rushed all over the Hokies last year in Piscataway. This is going to be a huge test for the Virginia Tech defensive front and really the front seven, in the sense of the game is going to be in your hands. I think this game falls entirely on the Virginia Tech front seven and how they're going to slow down this Rutgers rushing attack. Because if they do, I don't think the Scarlet Knights have much to offer on the offensive end. Defensively, I'm not really sure what we're going to see in this one. Mohamed Toure is not playing. He's one of Rutgers' best players. They're kind of banged up all over the field. Greg Schiano didn't really get into many specifics in his weekly presser, citing the fact that he wants to maintain some secrecy on that front. So a lot of unknowns, I think, for Rutgers coming into this game, given the schedule, given the injuries. But to me, this all relies on Virginia Tech's front seven.
Yeah, I mean, not much more to add to it, guys. It's a good old-fashioned battle of strength and what we perceive to be one of the weaknesses of the team, right, which is stopping the run. We saw that live in action last year against this very same cast of characters and this very same elite running back in Kyle Monangai, who, had one of his best games of the season against Virginia Tech in a season where, again, his overall PFF rushing rating was 92.2 for the year overall. Like, this is an NFL running back. And, you made what you assumed to be serious upgrades along the defensive front, and what you assumed to be an upgrade, at the Mike linebacker, as well as what we all hoped to be development from the guys that were there last year. And that all comes to the test on Saturday, right? I mean, you get a second shot against a team that not only beat you on the ground, like they did it very incredibly methodically. It's not like they did break off, everyone will remember last year that big just punch in the stomach 50-yard run from Monangai when Virginia Tech had clawed their way back into the game. I believe the score was 21-16 Rutgers after Virginia Tech had been down by much more. But outside of that, it was, methodical, burn you down, 5 yards per carry. Something that we've seen to an extent done against Virginia Tech already this year by a Vanderbilt team who used the ground game to control the clock. And, this is going to be a more talented team than Vanderbilt was. I can promise you that to our listeners. So speaking of Vanderbilt, right, it's to me, what I see the game as is, number one, the opportunity for Brent Pry to get in a toss-up game what could be considered to be a signature win, right? I mean, despite the winning record to this point, a lot of doubts around this program, given the high expectations and the perceived increase in competition, right, compared to what we thought some of those teams would be from what we've seen in the first few weeks, right? So this is going to be a big confidence game for the fan base surrounding the program. Number two, part of what would make it such a big win for Brent Pry, ending that streak, non-conference Power 5 games, 2017, too long. I believe longest in FBS at this point, or in Power 5.
Yeah, I think Power 5.
Wouldn't shock me.
Yeah. Longest at this point. And got to get that monkey off your back. It's an incredibly painstaking thought to think that Virginia Tech could schedule Rutgers and Vanderbilt in the same season and not be able to leave that season having broken that hex that has been placed upon them in these non-conference games. So if I don't want to carry that with this program for another full off season. Let's get that out of the way. Those are the main ones for me, at least 10,000-foot view. But it's a litmus test on where have you improved in the areas that you specifically had to do so most when we were addressing it this offseason.
Yeah, this would also be the first time that Virginia Tech has won 3 games in a row in the last 5 years. They haven't done it since 2019, if you guys can believe it. Tough. Tough. So yeah. It would be good. It would be good to get that monkey off the back as well. I think by all indications, like I feel like just through 3 games, I think we've seen improvement on the defensive line. I think we've seen improvement in the secondary since the opener against Vanderbilt. I think we've seen incremental improvements with a linebacking core, but it hasn't been really consistent. And the Vanderbilt game was so ugly for the defense from a rushing perspective. And it's been better the last couple of weeks. Like Virginia Tech's rushing defense was better against Marshall and looked better against Old Dominion. But there have been a few pop plays, right, where the defense falls asleep for a second, gives up a big run. And that was a problem last year, obviously more frequently. But we're still seeing that pop up here and there. And in order for Virginia Tech to be the defense they want to be, they obviously need to limit those plays that have really plagued them over the last couple of seasons in particular on defense. But that opener was so bad against Vanderbilt from a rushing defense standpoint. Virginia Tech has still been giving up a couple of big runs here and there. Through 3 games, Tech is 113th nationally in rushing defense, if you guys can believe it. That's actually kind of shocking to me because I think they've played a little bit better than that, especially given the 3-game sample size, but they're giving up over 5 yards per carry right now. And Obviously, this is a game where that can't happen, right? I think Monagai's going to be good. He's going to make a play or two. But if that play or two turns into 3, 4, 5, 6 plays where all of a sudden he's rushing for like 150, 160 yards and a couple touchdowns, I think that's where you find yourself, getting into the second half and really not feeling particularly good about the direction of the game. Virginia Tech's linebackers really need to come to play on Saturday is what I'm saying. I think the defensive line will hold up their end of the bargain. I'm confident that the secondary, given what we've seen so far, especially out of the safeties, right? It's been really, really encouraging the way the safeties have played so far. The cornerback play, I know that Delane struggled in the opener, but he's been good the last 2 weeks. And I think given his track record over his first couple seasons in Blacksburg, I think we can chalk up the opener to Vanderbilt as a little bit of an aberration because just given how he's played overall over the course of his career, just chalk it up to a bad game and move on from it.
Yeah.
But the linebacking core, Tech's a little banged up there, right? Like they're still trying to figure out weak side linebacker, right? Caleb Woodson was listed as a starter on the depth chart. He had been rotating in with Kelly Lawson. Lawson got, so there are some questions about what Virginia Tech is still kind of going to do at linebacker, right? There's still questions there. And I think whenever you're shuffling, it's not a good thing. We've already seen Jaden Keller get shuffled around a little bit. There are a lot of questions with the linebacking core still, not only finding the right mix, but finding the guys who are going to make the plays consistently. And that is the single biggest area I'm looking at in this game on Saturday, right? That's the area that scares me the most. Because we've seen Virginia Tech's offense on the other side. We've seen them figure it out, right? They ram their head against the wall, and then within a game, they go into halftime, they make an adjustment. In the second half, they figure it out. And we've seen that in each of the first 3 games. We've seen the offense improve from half number 1 to half number 2. And I don't think a slow start by the offense in this game on Saturday necessarily dooms Virginia Tech, because I don't think this offense that Rutgers is presenting is one that puts Virginia Tech in a bind where they couldn't come back, particularly because Rutgers' passing game, Ricky mentioned it, they're relying upon a bunch of transfers in the receiving core, and their quarterback I don't think is as good as Wimsatt was a year ago, or at least he's not as problematic to Virginia Tech. So, the single biggest area I'm looking for is Virginia Tech's linebacking core against the Rutgers rushing attack. And how does that look? I think that will tell the story of the entire game on Saturday, as long as Tech does the things they have to do offensively, take care of the football, all that good stuff.
Kyron Drones did not have a good time against the Scarlet Knights last year.
No, he's due for one.
Bashal Tootin is banged up. He's listed as questionable by Brent Pry. This could be a big game for Kyron and his development as a quarterback. In a game where I think there's going to be limited possessions given Rutgers' style of play and their ability to effectively run the football. Given what we've seen from Kyron, he could really use a strong game from him from a confidence perspective, but also in terms of showing some of the projection and the growth that we expected to see after last year. So I think Kyron has a huge opportunity on Saturday to go out there and maybe quiet some of the doubters that have been, I think, rightfully, not all that impressed with what he's done so far.
Mike, I think you made a good point there earlier about, Rutgers' offense not being the type that you'd trust to score a bunch of points in a hurry, right? Not the kind of team that is optimal to play from behind, if you will. Like I think you'd be more confident in Virginia Tech's chances to come back down 14 than Rutgers' chances to come back down 14. But at the same, by the same token, like just from what we've seen so far, and whatever you said it was, 113th in the country. Those are some jarring numbers, but the fact of the matter is you saw it against Vanderbilt and you saw it at various points last season anytime Virginia Tech played against anyone with a competent running game and offensive line. This team just hasn't done it yet, right? So I think in one sense, yeah, I suppose it presents an opportunity for them to end that stigma and prove that wrong. But I think what's more likely is kind of exactly what you're saying, Ricky, which is that given the circumstances, Kyron's going to have to get his, right? I think that a slow-paced, jawed-out game is totally advantage Rutgers. And if Virginia Tech's going to want to win this one, 30 points on the board at a minimum, right? And you hope that the defense can, put up a more respectable showing. But I wouldn't – if you tell me Virginia Tech doesn't score 30 points in that game, I'm instinctually telling you right now, I don't think they won. So the offense has shown that they can do it, but this is going to be the best test that they faced defensively all year. Certainly the most continuity defensively, compared to Vanderbilt. But I mean, they ultimately did have their way with Vanderbilt. They're going to have to play a balanced game for 4 quarters, and Kyron's going to have to shine a little bit because Tutin's been carrying this team offensively for the better part of 3 games, and everything's gone through him. But given the circumstances right now, if he does play, I don't think he can be that tugboat. The coaches have to think about A, his health, B, whether he's more effective, and C, the remainder of the season and the wear and tear that's going to take. So big Kyron game, and consequently a big game for the receivers, and you hope to have Chaplin there at left tackle going into this one.
Tech's a little banged up, goes out saying Ali Jennings hurt. I would like to see him out there because even though he's been a little bit quiet on the receiving front, he's one of Virginia Tech's most proven blockers downfield. I think he really impacts the running game. I mean, we've seen him early in the year throw a couple of key blocks on some big Bashal Tutin runs, so I would love to see him out there from that standpoint. We'll see. I mean, Tech's banged up. Rutgers is coming off a bye, which, I mean, that's something to note here, too, when we're talking about 2 teams that, even in a small sample size are dealing with some injuries. Rutgers hasn't played in 2 weeks, right? Virginia Tech is coming off of a nice win, but one that was costly in terms of guys getting hurt. So, we'll see. The one thing I just want to circle back to real quick, and again, we're dealing with small sample sizes here, so we have to take everything with a grain of salt. I mentioned Virginia Tech's rushing defense. We've talked about Virginia Tech's red zone struggles. But the one thing I want to note is Virginia Tech has done a pretty good job this year of getting off of the field on third down defensively. They've only given up a little over 28% of opponent conversions on third down so far this year. They've done a really good job defensively getting off the field. Rutgers through 2 games. Now, again, it's against Howard and Akron, but Rutgers has a top 5 unit in terms of staying on the field on third down. So, again, it was Howard and Akron, so take it with a grain of salt. It's 2 games, not 3, so that skews it a little bit. Kyle Montague also coming off of a career-high 208 yards against Akron, so he's coming off the best game of his career. It's all about Virginia Tech's defense here. Virginia Tech's offense flipping back over to what you guys were just talking about, and I think it's a big drones game too because we don't know, how banged up Tutin actually is. It's clear that he's a little hurt, right? I think it would be a pretty big surprise if he did not play on Saturday. He was listed as a starter on the depth chart. I think Tech's expecting him to play perhaps in a more limited capacity, right? But it would be a surprise to not see him as his normal self. Now, with that said, Andrew brought up a great point. Even if he is feeling okay and feeling good enough to go, is this a situation where you want to run him 18 to 20 times on Saturday? Maybe not, right? Maybe not. If that's the case, maybe running drones a little bit more. This is the time to do it. And
Malachi Thomas.
And Malachi Thomas.
He
pray low and mix
he's been
these guys
effective in the limited carries that he's gotten. I think that Malachi can shoulder some of the load here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And this is a really important game for Virginia Tech because of how good Miami's looked. And Tech's going to enter that game as probably around a 2-score underdog. Maybe
Yep.
maybe I'm overestimating that a little bit. This is a really important one for Virginia Tech to get. And obviously they're not going to rest guys for other games, and I mean, they're not going to do that. I mean, this is a really, really important one for Virginia Tech on Saturday.
I asked this question on Inside the Tunnel. I want to ask you guys the same thing. What would need to happen on Saturday for you to go into the Miami game with a semblance of confidence that Virginia Tech has a real shot to go out there and win? Let's just say that Miami plays pretty well against South Florida. Maybe doesn't blow them out of the water, but the game is right on the spread of 18 or whatever it is, or 14.
Play a 4-quarter game. I mean, it's simple. Just be who you've been in the second half of all these games for 4 quarters. I mean, it's real simple. Don't start slow and play a 4-quarter game. They haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty accurate. I think for me, it would, in terms of a margin of victory, it would have to be something like 14 to 17 points.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
I'm slowly buying into the Miami hype for this year. Slowly, not all the way there yet, but I do think Miami is pretty good. I do think they're far better than Virginia Tech is at the moment. So if you want to walk into Miami with some semblance of confidence, you've got to be able to put Rutgers away pretty convincingly.
Agree. Yeah, that's how I feel too. How about you, Andrew? What's your answer to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would say multiple scores.
Yeah.
Really, it would really. I feel like a lot of things. I'm pretty high on Miami, right? I mean, the one thing I'm not worried about is Virginia Tech's ability in pass coverage, which will be one of Miami's strengths. So I guess you have that going for you. So just completely shutting down the run and a whole new world in the trenches. The offensive line plays their best collective game that they've played, in a year and a half or whatever, because that's going to be where the strongest disadvantage, or one of the strongest disadvantages, lies. Yeah. So I think that Virginia Tech can win this game with average play from their offensive line, but knowing that would not give me any confidence that they have a chance against the U.
I agree. Yeah, that's a really good point on the offensive line. Just given what Miami's got up front defensively, I think that's a really, really good point. ACC picks. Do you guys have anything else? I mean, this is a pretty simple game for me. I mean, it's good for as good as Rutgers is, and I think they're good. I think they're really well coached. That's another thing real fast I want to bring up.
I was going to save that for the pick. Damn it.
The coach, well, you still can. I won't.
Yeah.
I won't spoil it for you. But Rutgers, I think, has a coaching advantage here, and yes. I really need Virginia Tech's coaching staff to put together one of their best games since Pry got here. That would be another key to me thinking that they would have a chance against Miami. Not to look ahead, but putting together a 4-quarter game plan with the coaching staff would be really good too.
Yeah.
So that's a concern I have.
It's Greg Schiano in year 5 with a bye week to prepare for you. Coaching matters, and I do think that they probably will have the edge there. But I think inevitably we do have to bring this up because we haven't done this in a while. We got to ask the question: is this the most important game of the Brent Pry era to this point?
We haven't asked that.
Haven't asked that in a while. What was the last most important game? Louisville?
Maybe
Pitt was a very important game.
Pitt was pretty important last year. Yeah. Pitt
Things
was
could have gone
probably
really south after Pitt.
I think in the 2+ year tenure, I think Pitt was in a office term, threat level midnight, right? That was the one. I mean, there were some other ones last year where we were like, oh, this is pretty important. This is pretty important. Like Louisville, okay, this is an important game. NC State, important. Pitt was yo, if you don't win this, like we're firing coordinators and stuff like a year and a half in. That's not good.
Yeah.
Whether you do it now or do it later, like we got to do it. So that was probably the most important one. This is pretty important, I think, for perception of this team this year, right? Even more so than losing an opener to Vanderbilt, which doesn't look great, but like after an entire offseason, like this is like the first good team you've played. Like Rutgers is legitimately like a good team. I think they're a good team, and I think they're well coached. This is the best team you played so far. I think this is the most important one of 24 so far.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back a lot to, as stupid as it sounds, what I was saying before, right? You have a fan base who, for the first time in half a decade, got out of bed this offseason thinking that they had a good team going out in the field and that there was a chance that Virginia Tech returns to national prominence. If you start that season 2-2 with losses to Vanderbilt and Rutgers, I mean, just from an optics perspective,
not good.
Demoralizing to a group of fans who felt like they were back, given that these are like notoriously bottom tier programs wherever they are right now. And not saying that either of them are in great shape.
Yeah.
And the other side of things, nationally too. It's like, remember when they said Virginia Tech was back? Then they lost to Vanderbilt and Rutgers. That was funny. Like, come on, you got to win this. Break that down.
Getting to Stanford at 3-2 as opposed to 2-3 is a big difference.
Monumental difference. Yeah.
No.
Pretty good chance that Virginia Tech faces a better coaching staff here in Rutgers than they face in a week against Miami with Mario Cristobal. And I'm not even trolling. I'm like pretty serious. That. I see Ricky laughing. I had to get it in there, Rick. I had to get that jab in.
I'm all here for the Miami jab.
I had to get the jab in.
Look, these coaching staffs faced off last year in the Pinstripe Bowl, and Greg Schiano got the best out of Mario Cristobal on that day. Just saying.
That is a disgusting
hasn't even been a year.
But you're right. That did happen. That is quite the poll. Thanks for reminding me of that one. Friday, 7:30 ESPN. We're in ACC picks, by the way, now. Stanford, traveling on the road. They've never faced an environment quite like this one. At the JMA Wireless Dome on a Friday night. Nobody goes into the JMA Wireless Dome on a Friday night and leaves unscathed. Syracuse has a 9-point advantage in the spread going into this one. Who do you guys got?
Somebody said you just throw Kyle McCord in a dome and let him cook, and that's what it's looking like. It's what it's looking like. It's happening. So I'll take Syracuse to be able to cover that spread.
Friend of the show, Jimmy Cleveland, has a Syracuse to the playoff ticket, I believe, or
my
Syracuse
God.
ACC champion ticket. He was showing me his other bets that he had. I'm like, whoa. What was that? Right there on your screen. But I do believe in Syracuse. I don't know. Still to this point, I don't know much about Stanford. They seem to be better than as bad as I thought they initially were. This will be a good measuring stick game to find out. But I'll take Syracuse to cover 9 here.
I thought my Oklahoma State to the playoff ticket was gross. That's like way worse.
Yeah. I have a Kyrie Irving to win the Heisman one, so I don't know.
Okay, I think you could have bought a cheeseburger
like to light
instead.
money on fire, don't you?
Yeah, you could have bought a cheeseburger instead. NC State traveling to Clemson.
Well, Mike, who are you picking? You didn't.
Oh,
you
sorry.
Didn't give us a pick there.
I'm probably picking Syracuse there. Okay. I'm probably picking Syracuse there.
Probably.
Probably, yeah.
Come on, man up, Mike.
Syracuse for now.
Come on.
You're the only one that gets the opportunity to change because you have.
What kind of waffling is this?
I
for Scott, that's going to listen to this, so he can track our picks finally.
I also need to be consistent.
You're putting Mike down for Syracuse here.
I also need to be consistent between my two podcasts. No, wait a minute. No, I don't. Okay, NC State traveling to Clemson, noon on ABC in Death Valley. Clemson.
I'm probably gonna. No, I'm just kidding.
Clemson is a 20-point favorite, and that is because Grayson McCall is out for this game for NC State. It's also because I don't think NC State is speaking to teams that thought they were going to be pretty good that just aren't. I think NC State fits that bill. Give me Clemson. I mean, this could be scary for NC State's. Like I think the backup's a sophomore. Bruh, they couldn't throw the ball downfield with him in the lineup. This is not going to go well here, Clemson.
This would be the kind of game, though, that like Clemson would fool around and not be able to cover the spread.
The total here is 46.5.
Yeah.
Implied score of like 30.
35 to 10-ish.
36. Yeah, I was going to say 36 to 11. Like, oh.
I'm actually gonna have the Wolfpack here with the points. They're not gonna win, but give me NC State with the points.
The kid's name is CJ Bailey, apparently.
Yeah, that's correct.
Allegedly.
Listed as a freshman.
Allegedly, that's his name.
ESPN. I'm assuming that means redshirt freshman.
No, redshirt freshman.
The thing is, NC State, there's a reason they had expectations. They didn't load up on talent, but freshman quarterback against Clemson, that does not seem like a good recipe. So I'll take the Tigers to cover.
Yeah, I might actually bet on that bad boy.
Are you going to lock it up?
Yeah, that's got lock potential. I'm doing my ACC pod tomorrow night. That's got lock potential.
It's probably a lockup since it's
probably,
I can't make a decision.
Well, it's Tuesday night. I got some time. Okay,
Oh
James
my
Madison.
God.
James Madison on the road.
Waffling more than a
Chapel
politician,
Hill.
Michael. Come on.
In Chapel Hill. Well, the podcasting career doesn't work out. Just kidding.
Give me the Tar Heels here.
10.5-point favorites. James Madison's bad. Carolina is shuffling quarterbacks. Jacoby Criswell played most of the game last weekend. He played pretty well. They got options there, I guess. Omari and Hampton really good. Give me Carolina.
Yeah.
Hampton makes a difference here.
Yeah, they say when you have two quarterbacks, that actually means you have none, which might be the case for North Carolina, but I'll take them. The run game, Hampton's a difference maker there. So we'll give it to that, or give it to the Heels.
Yeah, I think it's fair. Virginia lost a weird one last weekend. They're traveling to Coastal Carolina. UVA, a 3.5-point road favorite. That's 2:00 ESPN Plus. If you're sick enough to watch that, I might. I like UVA here. I am not buying Coastal Carolina. So I'm just not doing it. I refuse.
Are you buying Monticello Manziel?
Monticello Manziel, the one, Anthony Calandria. That was an all-time YouTube comment.
That's
Andrew,
a great nickname.
That I received
phenomenal.
on a live show for my ACC pod last week. During the preview, when we were previewing the UVA game, we had a UVA fan in the mentions when we were previewing the Maryland game refer to Anthony Calandria as Monticello Manziel. So give me Monticello Manziel in the Who's.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the most electric nicknames I've actually ever heard. Hate it to be for a team that I don't like very much, but I actually, believe it or not, you want to hear something sick? Earlier today, I was watching a ACC network replay of Maryland UVA because it was on TV and there was nothing else to watch.
Jesus.
I had a friend over and he's like, kind of asking me to explain UVA football to him. And I said, the quarterback, Calandria, I explained how bad they were generally. But I said, the quarterback they got, Calandria, he's always trying to do something out there. It's not always effective, but he's always trying to make something happen. And I think that against Coastal Carolina, he might be able to make just enough things happen for UVA to cover 3.5 there. So give me the Hoos.
He's always trying to do something. Is a good description of Anthony Calandra.
I am drinking the haterade. Give me the Chanticleers as home dogs.
Hell yeah. Why
Ricky,
not?
a big Ethan Vasco fan.
On the blue turf.
Huge. I've got a jersey.
On the blue turf. Speaking of two teams we don't really know anything about, Georgia Tech.
Game of the
traveling
week.
to number 19 Louisville.
Game of the week for the ACC. Huge.
Well, I mean, some of us are going to be sickos and watch Michigan State, Boston College at 8 p.m. in Chestnut Hill, or
also important.
Cal, or Cal on the road in Tallahassee, because Cal Twitter is very lit.
Cal Twitter is lit,
extremely lit. Georgia Tech is a 10.5 point underdog on the road at Louisville. Look. My 2 cents here is we know nothing about either of these teams. Louisville has beaten Austin Peay and Jacksonville State. Georgia Tech beat what is now known as the Corps of Florida State. They have also beaten VMI. They lost to the only good team they've played in Syracuse. And they beat Georgia State 35-12. And by associated property, Georgia State beat Vanderbilt. So just noting that.
Take that as you will, folks.
Take that as you will. I think Georgia Tech's the right side here.
Yeah.
I think Georgia Tech plus the 10.5 is the right side.
Laying 10.5 with a team that hasn't played anybody and you don't know anything about seems ludicrous.
Right. And that's kind of where I'm at. At least I have one data point with Georgia Tech that indicates they have played a team that I think is pretty decent in Syracuse. And did they play great? No, they didn't. But I didn't come away from that game thinking that Georgia Tech wasn't any good and that Syracuse was really, you know what I mean? I didn't come away thinking that. I came away thinking that Georgia Tech got beat by a good team on the road. So
this Louisville ranking is fraudulent.
As far as we know,
I'm fairly confident that 19th is fraudulent. Give me the Yellow Jackets.
Yeah, in the battle of quarterbacks, I know what I'm getting out of one of them, and that's Haynes King. Limited sample size with Tyler Shaw shows him to be
Tyler Shuck.
Shuck. Okay.
Which is apparently how that's pronounced.
Exactly.
Allegedly.
Who knows?
That pronunciation shucked.
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't watching Texas Tech last year. Either way.
Exactly.
Exactly. I'll take the Jackets.
Probably saved yourself a few shekels, as they say. If you weren't live firing on Texas Tech games, they look horrendous this year. My God, they're terrible. It's so bad. That defense is ass. Anyway.
Okay, enough Texas Tech strays. Let's go.
Anyway. Can I interest you in Youngstown State over Pitt?
Hey, this would be an all-time Pitt loss right here,
This would be the first time. Look, if Pitt gets this done, it is the first time they have gone undefeated in the non-con since joining the ACC.
As much as I hate to say it, I got to go with
year.
Yeah, I think, Pitt,
they do it.
Pitt's going to roll in this one probably.
Fairly certain. But this is one they would lose. It would be very funny.
It would be very funny.
It's funny because they won the ACC that one year with Pickett. But, we don't have the spread on it, so I refuse to bet on it. But go Youngstown State. The Penguins.
Duke. A 14-point. They're laying 14.
Absurd.
At the formerly known as Fighting Rick Stockstills. Laying 14 in Middle Tennessee State?
Because as you well know, if you're a listener of the show and you follow me on X, I have instituted a 1-year ban on Duke. So do I pick the team that fired the legendary Rick Stockstill? That's a tough ask for me, guys. I don't know.
Here's what I can tell you, folks, because I've been paying attention. One of my favorite teams in college football, Tennessee Tech. traveled
Oh my God.
to Middle Tennessee.
Which I'm not even sure that's a thing, by the way. Tennessee Tech.
Yes, Tennessee Tech. Do you know who their safeties coach is? Do you know who their safeties coach is? Chase Muma.
Wow. Yeah. See, Andrew knows.
Yeah, I am a fan of Tennessee Tech. Do you know who Tennessee Tech had to play the following week? Georgia. That was not as fun of a game. But Tennessee Tech, in their first year under Bobby Wilder, this is a rebuild at the FCS level. Almost came in to beat them. And they were celebrating in the locker room like they just won the Super Bowl. I'm like, you nearly lost to an in-state FCS school in year one of a rebuild. They then proceeded to get absolutely wrecked by Ole Miss. No surprise there. Non-competitive against Western Kentucky. Duke is a team with Power 5 non-conference win under their belts in Northwestern and a soon-to-be Power 5 non-conference win in UConn. So give me the Blue Devils here. I'm sorry, Ricky. But Rick Stockstill's grave will not be defiled by the current regime.
The thing for me that's probably going to set me on Duke would be I think their defense is legitimate. I'm not sure they have any stars on that side of the ball, but they are really, really efficient on the defensive side so far. So I guess I got to take the Blue Devils.
Just goes to show Mike Elko didn't leave the cover completely bare, and Manny Diaz could coach defense.
What's that like, not leaving the cover bare? I'm not familiar with that.
We
saw it in 2016, my friend. You saw that in 2016.
I guess that's true. Yeah, I guess that's true.
That was almost a decade ago, boys. Don't forget that. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. Wasn't married or I didn't have a kid yet either.
I had just graduated college.
I was still very much in college.
Well, now that we got that recap in, I haven't picked this game yet. And Middle Tennessee State, like you mentioned, Andrew, they barely beat Tennessee Tech. They lost by 4 touchdowns to a directional Kentucky. Granted, it was Western Kentucky, who's decent, but they lost by 4 touchdowns to them. I cannot in good conscience, even with the questions I have about Duke, I cannot in good conscience pick Middle Tennessee here. They are awful. They are really bad.
This would be a pretty diabolical loss if they were to somehow get upset in this situation. Speaking of which, are Duke fans mad about having to play this game on the road? I mean,
no, that's only something we complain about.
We heard all week about the constant complaining about ODU. Wonder if Duke fans are as riled up about this one.
I think Duke.
I would probably doubt it.
Something that's flying under the radar here is that I get to break out is Duke the worst 4-0 team in the country, like I did with Boston College last year? Except this one wouldn't be that controversial. I think the answer would just be yes. They are the worst 4-0 team in the country.
Correct.
Yeah. Well,
I'm paging any singular AP voter that might be listening to this. Please just put them at 25 next week.
Just for the lulz.
Someone,
please.
Just one vote. That's all I ask for, one vote. Which, by the way, I do not think that the fantasy of Virginia Tech getting a courtesy ranking after beating Rutgers to make it a ranked matchup against Miami is going to happen. That would require a lot of conspiring on the part of the worldwide leader.
I was going to say, ESPN will be angling.
That many teams.
ESPN will be angling for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody watch Monday Night Football last night? ESPN is nothing if not biased. I don't even like the Eagles. TCU. Now, we're getting into some actual good games now. TCU. Traveling to SMU. TCU a 3-point favorite.
Fade the ponies. Fade the ponies.
Buddy, I'm on SMU here. That loss by TCU last weekend, I don't know if you guys watched any of that game against UCF. Multi-score game. Just a heinous loss. And I'm afraid for TCU that they are going to let UCF beat them twice. Give me SMU.
It reminds me of the good old Southwest Conference. Remember those days?
There's another poll. R.I.P. in peace. They didn't get their television deal done.
No, they did not.
Quickly enough.
No, they did not.
Unfortunately.
But I will take the Horned Frogs in this one.
Southwest Conference might have existed before television. Miami, traveling to South Florida.
Canes
minus 16.5. That line. I mean, Alex Golish has a good thing going to South Florida. That line stinks. That line stinks to high heaven. That feels like Miami should be laying like almost 3 scores, right?
Yep.
Give me Miami. I'll fall for it. Give me the Kings.
Well, perhaps, the odds makers
Backdoor cover?
taking that look at the Florida game, and it's suddenly not as impressive anymore. And since then, you've beaten Florida A&M and Ball State. So, a 21-point spread. USF's a competent team.
They
USF,
are. Yeah, they
USF,
are. They're good.
Byron Brown, actually a player who I'm not even joking that I'm aware of him, is kind of a dude.
He's good. Yeah, he's a good player. Yeah,
to be
good.
laying, 21, 22, that seems like there'd be a lot of money coming in on USF. So I'm still going to go with Miami, but I think I don't think it's like a crazy concept to bet against them. But this is a great opportunity for Miami to, Miami has 2 great opportunities to kind of separate themselves from the pack, and playing 2 teams that are perceived competent in South Florida, Virginia Tech, back-to-back weeks.
I was going to try to say this with a straight face, but I can't do it. I was going to say, this could be a trap game with Virginia Tech coming up next week. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say, would Virginia Tech beat South Florida?
I mean, it's a question I have. I don't know. I mean, would they have the coaching advantage in that game? I don't know. Cal.
Moving on.
Moving on. I picked Miami, by the way, I think. Cal. I'm laughing about this one. Cal's traveling to Tallahassee, Florida State. Can you imagine looking at this game a month ago, like before the Georgia Tech game, and if I told you, hey, Florida State's only going to be a 2-point favorite against Cal? You would have taken me out bet. Never mind. I'm going to leave that there. Cal is a 2-point underdog. Give me the Bears. We're on Overwatch, man. We're on Overwatch with the Seminoles.
It is actually quite shocking to see Florida State favored in this game. I'm rolling with Cal.
I mean, I'm excited for this one. I am. This is
electric.
Like I'm already thinking, like, in my mental game plan for Saturday, how quickly I'm going to have to scurry from Lane Stadium to Champs to make sure I can watch this game in tandem with the following game that we're going to pick after this. Because, I mean, what a slate ACC football has put together for us. Purely riding emotion, I'm going to take Cal here just because it needs to happen.
It's a fun night slate, man. It's a fun night slate. I forgot to mention that SMU is a trademark, by the way, a CW underdog. So forgot to mention that earlier. That's another good reason to take the old Cowboys. Anyway, I mean, how funny would it be if Florida State lost again? Seriously, how funny would it be?
Yeah, it'd be amazing, Michael.
Now, one thing I want to note, Florida State's getting their offensive coordinator back, Alex Atkins. He's been serving a suspension for recruiting stuff. Not important. Doesn't matter. They clearly didn't recruit well enough, so it's fine. He's basically serving a suspension for no reason.
In 1 week, do you think you can teach DJU how to throw the ball downfield?
Oh, man. Why is it that the only place DJU looked competent was Oregon State? Like, you had to go all the way across the country to look competent. Crazy. Maybe you just shouldn't play on the East Coast.
Hey, he got paid.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that guy's run a bag up, and now he's gonna make a great tight end at the NFL. Michigan State traveling to Chestnut Hill to play Boston College. BC, 6.5-point favorite against the 3-0 Michigan State Spartans, which is like impossible to believe. I don't know, man. It's a year 1 coaching situation with Sparty, as we know.
And BC.
But BC, at least the cupboard wasn't left bare at Boston College. Michigan State, it was like outside of quarterback, it was a max exodus. But I don't know. Charles is pretty good, and Boston College is coming off of a game at Missouri that was a tough loss, a little bit of a body blow game in the second half. BC feels like the better team. 6 in the hook is tough, man. I think it's going to be a close game. I like BC close. I think I might take Michigan State to cover. I like BC close here, though.
I'm in the same boat. I'll take the Spartans to cover.
I'll take BC to cover, though it is, a little bit challenging for me, I would say, to pick again. We talk about coaching advantages, and Jonathan Smith was the guy that made DJU look good at Oregon State. So the guy's clearly got some sort of magic when it comes to offensive football. And like you mentioned, Childs, who was DJU's understudy, not bad for making that move up to the Big Ten from being a backup in the Pac-12. But I'm starting to think with the Missouri loss that BC, they are going to be a force to be reckoned with. Maybe Bill O'Brien was the guy at Virginia Tech all along. Only time will tell.
Well, that's a disgusting poll. I've said that to you several times tonight. You've pulled some information that I really didn't want to remember, but now have had to. So thank you for that.
All this stuff is just stuck in my sick head, my friend.
This is what we get for doing this whole college football thing.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech, Rutgers, the moment you've all been waiting for since we started the ACC picks like a half hour ago. Virginia Tech is a 3.5-point favorite in Lane Stadium. I think if Virginia Tech had a clean bill of health, they'd be closer to like a 5-point favorite. I think because there are some question marks with guys being banged up, I think that's why you're seeing the line where it is. I am going to reluctantly take the Hokies. I have concerns here because I do think Rutgers has a coaching advantage. I think Kyle Monaghy is obviously a great back. This is one of the few games this season where I think that the team that Virginia Tech is playing has a better running back than Virginia Tech does. One of the few times I'm going to say that, I think, in this entire schedule. And that's a compliment to Monaghy. That doesn't mean anything against Tootin. Obviously, he's a fantastic player. But I think Virginia Tech will bottle up the run enough, right? That doesn't mean Monaghy won't break one here or there, but I think they'll bottle up the run enough to make Rutgers throw the ball. I think Rutgers' defense will make Tech work for everything they get, but I do think talent wins out here. All this time this year, we've talked about so far, we've talked about Virginia Tech's offensive struggles and, the skill positions and quarterback, and, we've had our issues with the offensive line from a personnel standpoint, but I don't think at any time this year we've thought that Virginia Tech was lacking talent at quarterback, at running back, at skill positions in the receiving room. I think Virginia Tech's offense does enough to get the job done here. I like a low-scoring game. If you're going to bet the total, 44.5, I'd bet the under. It's one of my favorite bets of the entire week, to be honest. I like the Hokies here. 21-13. Tech by a touchdown. Close game. I think Tech's going to struggle to get separation here. I think it's going to be a fun one. I think it's going to be an old Fuente term, a 4-hour stomach ache.
Yeah. I don't know what the specific stat is, but I don't think that Brent Pry has won a game where he is like inside of a touchdown favorite yet. I think all of his wins, he's either been like a huge favorite or an underdog.
Try to break that streak too.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to save it for the end, but we did kind of talk about it there towards the close of our preview. But I'm a big believer in Greg Schiano. I think he's a great coach. I'm not sold on this coaching staff, unfortunately, for Virginia Tech. Tech is banged up. Tech has looked inconsistent. It just so happens that the biggest weakness on this Virginia Tech roster, in my mind, outside of the offensive line, is the linebacking group. And Rutgers is one of the best rushing attacks they're probably going to face all season long. I, too, believe this is going to be close. I certainly do not think Virginia Tech is going to cover that. And, in fact, I am going to pick Rutgers to win outright in this one. Not happy about it, boys. Really hoping I'm jinxing the team here, but give me Rutgers something along the lines of 24-20 or 24-21.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Ricky. For all the reasons you just made, it is a weakness lined up against a pure strength. And in fact, time will tell by the end of the season if Kyle Monangai is the best running back the Hokies see all year, right? He's certainly almost guaranteed to be, on the final stage for that one in that conversation when it's all said and done. 113th nationally right now against the run. And you compile that with the fact that Bijan might not be 100%. You don't know about the status of your left tackle against the best defensive front you're going to see all year to this point. I don't love it. I think Tech still got some talent. They've clearly shown they should be able to hang in there, but they haven't shown me effectively enough that they're going to be able to stop Monangai. I can't in good conscience until they do, pick them to win a game that lines up like this. So give me Rutgers outright, please.
Gross. Gross. Both of you.
Not
Gross.
fun.
Not fun.
Be happy to be wrong. I'm going to the game. I'm traveling for it. I actually want to see a victory in this game more so.
Of course you do. You're in a line. Of course you do. We all do.
No, I'm saying I want to see a victory in this game, perhaps more so than most games I've attended in the Brent Pry era. I think this is what matters to me in the games that I've attended a lot. I would say Rutgers last year when I went to New Jersey for that one might be the number one up to this point. Seeing a win over NC State last year would have been pretty good too. But alas, neither of those first two happened. Give me something good. I want to be wrong really badly here, Mike, but and it's a great opportunity for them to, again, even with a win against Rutgers, the narrative surrounding the team heading into, Miami, and who knows what's going to happen there. But a loss to Rutgers, we're going to be having a whole lot more negative conversations on these pregame podcasts against Stanford, Georgia Tech, Boston College, the like. You'd have to see, because a win against Stanford is not going to make you buy this team. And a loss to Rutgers, once again, really would solidify the idea that Vanderbilt was not an anomaly and that this team truly is vulnerable no matter the competition. So let's not have that happen.
That's fair. We'll be back tomorrow night with a little surprise. How's that?
Yes, we will.
We'll
leave it there.
We'll leave it there. Listen to this podcast, though, before that. All right, cool.
Subscribe to it. If you're listening right now on Spotify or whatever, or you're listening on YouTube and you use Spotify, just go there, click subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, also subscribe there.
You're going to want to subscribe to the YouTube for this episode tomorrow night. We'll see you then. Go Hokies.